All right, so I'm Jake Marco, and this is Science to Sorcery, a podcast with the mission of creating a space for exploring the overlap of science and spirituality. I'm a life activation practitioner and ritual master in the Modern Mystery School. I've been exploring this path for 2.5 years. After having a very heavy science background, having this spiritual undercurrent has created a very balanced life for me. So I wanted to explore those overlaps with multiple different guests. Today, I have Robby Kramer with me, who recently graduated with his master's in physics, focused in quantum information. Robby and I met, it was back in 2020, I believe, January of 2020. So we've known each other over 5 years. How you doing, Robby?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being here. I know when it was we'd had a call before this and yesterday, sort of talking a little bit about, what I wanted to do with this podcast, and you popped in my mind as someone of like, Robby really loves science, but I think I had mentioned yesterday that you also are very open-minded to when things come up, when questions come up that you haven't pondered before. It's like I get to watch you think about it and really process that.
Yeah, I guess we'll see if that magic emulates itself in a video format. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting jumping off point. Is just like I've spent the last 3 years in Albuquerque, New Mexico, working, toward my PhD, and my whole life I've known. Like I'm 24 now. I've known my whole life, or most of it, that I've always wanted to do like something in science. Growing up, it's very easy in that kind of headspace to kind of dish your way with these like humanities and arts classes and be like, this is not for me. I'm going to be playing with particles my whole life, right? But growing up, getting out of like this bubble of like first childhood and then undergrad is like, okay, no, life is a lot more complicated, right? Science has taken us a very long way as a species, but it hasn't. It certainly leaves gaps in like your lived reality that you need to reckon with. So there's got to be something beyond just this, rote logic, rationality that kind of carries us forward. So,
Yeah. How has that come up for you? I guess were there any specific instances where you, in your lived experience, realized like there's some limit to just exploring the world through the lens of science?
um, I think it's for a lot of people like me, it comes up in like interpersonal, maybe like interactions. Like you just kind of see like, okay, a lot of people don't necessarily see the world through this like, whatever framework of some materialistic exploration. People are people. They live, they're social creatures. Um, and they're all very different. Um, I don't know if I have any profound specific experience example for you at the moment. Um, so maybe try asking me the question again.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can tell you a little bit from my perspective that might give some output there of like for me, I've very much been exploring the world with science. Like I said, Robbie, you and I met in 2020 when we were both in college. You were studying physics, I was studying biomedical engineering, and I had very much, been in all these classes focused on scientific discovery, scientific experimentation, engineering experimentation. And I personally had hit a limit for myself when I had been dealing with some health issues with my lower back. And this was in 2021, where I'd actually graduated and I'd gone off and started attending a graduate program at Tufts. And I had found personally that just trying to explore my own health through a scientific understanding of like going to every doctor and, you know, every appointment after appointment, trying to understand like what's going on with me, what's the mechanisms, when I feel tingling down my legs, how is that different than when I feel numbness? Is this pushing on the nerve? Or, is the action potential, how much sodium is going in and out of my nerves and going from cell to cell? Like,
Hmm.
I was obsessed with trying to understand what was happening in my body. Um, at the same time, I remember lying down in the office of my chiropractor at the time. We had like tables we would lie down on for a little bit before we get treated, and you could sort of hear the other patients going through. And this one patient came up to Dr. Bill, who I'd been seeing at the time, and she's like, "Man, I feel a lot better. Like things are going really great." And then I hear the other person be like, "Yeah, things are going great." Go off. And meanwhile, every time I'd see Dr. Bill, it's like, "All right, Dr. Bill, like what's going on here? I felt the on Wednesday I felt this symptoms. On Thursday I felt these symptoms. On Friday I felt these symptoms. Do you have answers for me?" And he'd be like, "All right, well, why don't you get face down? We'll do your treatments. We'll keep
Oh,
going." Like he would try to answer my questions, but it was one day that I was lying down and I heard all these people that were getting better. And the thing I noticed is they weren't so obsessed with
hmm.
understanding what was going on. So I had this idea in my head that if I understand what's happening, I will get better. And I had to reckon with, and I had this is when the first shift happened for me. In at least in this experience, this was one big shift was realizing, am I actually hurting myself, preventing my healing by being so focused on this scientific, logical understanding of what's happening?
Hmm. Okay. That's interesting. So it's like you were almost fixating on your like pain in some sense, and that like kept like reinforcing that you would keep experiencing the pain because you're like trying to do this like experiment on yourself almost. So you maybe subconsciously are like creating the conditions for the experiment to keep occurring, where unfortunately the experiment is like chronic pain, right? So
Yeah.
no ethics committee would sign off on that, but your brain has no problem just saying, here we go.
Yeah, there's no IRB approval on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's quite the sadistic experiment if you lay it out that way.
Maybe you should write something up on that.
Yeah,
Huh.
no, absolutely.
So, like, what ended up working to like just like specifically like, or maybe looking back in hindsight, could you point to anything like physically that you were doing to your back that you've like stopped doing that has made it better?
It's a good question. So I had been doing like what I had found like physically that changed the most was finding a good chiropractor that I trusted. I had also been seeing an acupuncturist for some time. Um, and I actually ended up changing chiropractors at one point because he was technically very sound. Like the actual mechanics of what was happening were really helpful. And what I learned a lot about sort of healing through chiropractic was that it takes consistent care, right? You to get into a chronic condition takes years and years of wear and tear on the body. And it's usually only like one accident happens, but it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. So
Interesting.
like I had a skateboarding incident, but like the reality is there had been years and years and years of like looking down at my phone and having some injuries potentially from different sports and it all built up. Um, so part of it was finding not just a practitioner that was very like physically capable and had a lot of knowledge, but someone that I felt like I had trust with. So I actually ended up um, switching practitioners. This was in, I believe, June or July of 2022 that I ended up switching practitioners to someone that I trusted very much and was very technically sound and had gone through consistent care month after month. And things started to get better. Uh, Another piece of it, which we had sort of touched on in our previous call, was that I had, in this place of despair, decided I was going to try this energy healing called life activation. After having this really interesting experience in meditation, where I had gone to my future chiropractors, the one that I would eventually switch to, I'd gone to his wife for a meditation. And about 20 minutes into this meditation, she had me try out every single chair and I mean, I sort of told you the story already a little bit of I was pretty literally like in pain, was just like which chair will give me some place that I can sit and be able to focus. And what ended up happening was I was lying down with my feet up on the couch and 20 minutes into this meditation, my pain dissolved. And when it came back and we finished the meditation, she mentioned this healing called the life activation, which is supposed to be a permanent change. I didn't even know what it was about. I'd been introduced to some ideas through some professors that were like a professor that was a shaman back in college. So I'd sort of heard about these, spiritual things, and I was open-minded enough to be like, I don't know everything. Let's do it. Let's give it a try. And for me, that shift, one thing that shift did, which I started talking to you about yesterday actually, was that it made me really start taking more agency in my life. I wasn't the victim so much of like, okay, I'm just gonna sit back, lie in bed, wait for Dr. Bill to fix me. Uh, I decided, I'm gonna push myself. I'm actually gonna go out. I'm not fragile. I stopped looking at myself as broken as much
Hmm.
and looked at myself as something that can work.
Hmm.
And I ended up firing my chiropractor because as much as he was technically very sound, I realized I don't actually trust you. I don't feel cared for,
Hmm.
which is something I learned was very important. Like I'm so glad I had that experience. Uh, and as I was seeing this new chiropractor, Dr. Nick, and had been working with him and worked a little bit with his wife, doing some more energy work, I realized that as I was progressing on the physical realm, at the same time that I was doing energetic shifts, going through different classes, initiations, having what we call like vibrational uplifting. I noticed like my pain and like the rate at which I got better physically changed so much.
Hmm.
And it was very interesting as someone who came from a very scientific background and wanted to understand what's going on here to have like you know someone make some energetic shift in my body that I can't see and usually can't feel, sometimes can feel.
Hmm.
And it's like this thing like I can't explain what's changing, but I know I'm getting better.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, because you have like my brain's going back to an anthropology class I took in like high school, and there's like there's all these different like disciplines of medicine that have existed in various cultures throughout human history, and you can look at like modern medicine as really just like one of these many cultural inventions. Like my anthropology professor had done her like I guess her thesis or whatever they call that, where you actually go out and like participate in a culture for some number of months or years and like report back on it to the academic community. That's like how you get your anthropology PhD. Hers was in rural Mexico. And so there it's like hot and cold foods. So if you certain ailments are associated with your body just being like too hot or too cold, and you need to eat certain foods to either raise or lower your temperature accordingly. And it's interesting because you wouldn't really, there's no good scientific like basis for what foods are hot and what foods are cold. Like an apple will be hot and an orange is cold or something like that. But there's still like, I mean, but you still like, she witnessed and there was like observed healing powers, right, that manifested in this. Like there's so much that goes into just if you like believe you will get better, right, that you will get better. Um, it's like having that mental, like overcoming some mental barrier. Um, which I guess in chronic pain, it's easier to kind of build these things up almost. You like habituate the pain. Um, shoot, I had somewhere else I wanted to go with that. Hold on. Um, oh yeah, so I was talking like my therapist was talking about like all these different, psychological techniques that therapists still kind of argue about, like which is better for whatever. You have like psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, like existential psychology that's like dealing with, you know, certain different themes. And the problem that they have is that they all work, right? If you have a good enough relationship with your therapist, then like,
A horrible problem to have.
yeah, I mean, at least thank God, right? But uh, so yeah, there's something like deeply, maybe you could say mystical, right, about this healing, right? It's not something you can find in the scientific literature, it seems. Um, which is interesting. That's something worth exploring, I think. But I'm not really a medical doctor or biologist in any regard. So, uh, but someone from the outside looking in, it's certainly interesting. Um,
It's 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 one of those things where it's with like the hot and cold food, right? In Chinese medicine, you talk about like your yin and yang foods,
hmm,
and I think it was very interesting the thing you said about like this, allopathic medicine, what we call like modern Western medicine, is really only a few hundred years old in terms
hmm,
of like all the snippets of different ways that we've healed throughout our time. It's like it doesn't mean it's bad that it's
hmm.
newer. In fact, it's very good, very helpful.
Probably, yeah.
I'd say most people are pretty glad that allopathic medicine exists,
Hmm,
but it's a tool. And I guess what I've observed in my healing journey is that different tools are good for different things, right? You hammer a nail, you have a screwdriver for a screw.
hmm.
If I break my bone, or if I need like if I have a bad bacterial infection, I'm going to my allopathic doctor. Um, and different practitioners might be good for different things. And like a cognitive behavioral therapist might be good for some people's conditions or some people, where some people might prefer a psychotherapist, for example. And I actually don't, I'm not an expert. I don't know the difference between all of those. I've heard the words here and there.
Right. I don't know that I could provide any further insight into the psychological techniques. It's kind of interesting, right? Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw a therapist for a number of years back in 2021 and 2022. And I've talked to plenty of friends who have gone through therapy and talked to different therapists, and they talk about what their experience is. And I'm like, man, that is totally different than the experience I had.
oh, interesting.
And for some people it helps, and some people it doesn't help.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, we always have a bias. Like when at first, when my friends that were going to therapy and they were talking about what their therapist would say, I'd be like, oh man, this isn't what my person would say. This isn't what Peggy would say. You should go to my therapist. I think mine's way better.
Right.
We tend to have these biases towards the things that are helpful for us.
Sure. I'll keep going. I got nothing.
Yeah, you have a thinking face on there.
Yeah. Um,
It's interesting. But I know one of the things we wanted to talk about here,
oh,
speaking off of tools, was the way that science and spirituality, because I guess the experience that I had laid out was this place of realizing that spirituality, and we haven't even really delved into what that means exactly, but something outside of extra scientific, something outside of
yeah.
science was useful for me in
Mhm.
my healing. Um, but what I'm really interested in is talking about ways that science and spirituality actually overlap. And one thing that you had touched on in our pre-conversations was like the tools of science and the tools of spirituality. Like, where does spirituality have a place in science?
Sure. I mean, I guess, yeah, one sort of thing I can think about is just like the amount of like, you kind of as someone who maybe t learned science just from like a class, like a college course, you kind of you get the highlights, right? You get, Newton invents physics or Newton writes the Principia. He has all these ideas about motion, and then you learn some math about how cars move around circles or whatever. And then, you bish bash boss, eventually you're doing quantum mechanics, or you're trapping atoms with laser beams or whatever craziness is going on. But the real work of science is a lot of like long days, long hours of just sitting in lab kind of, and you're doing something. I mean, if from an experimental standpoint, you're doing something that if it's never been done before, like how are you so sure that it's even ever going to work, right? Like my background specifically is in like quantum optics, like photonics labs, so a lot of like lasers. But I mean, people are there, which is like for the aim of making quantum computers. But people are doing all kinds of insane experiments. Like right now, one of the biggest. sort of problems in physics is dark matter. It's like you have this sort of cosmological expansion, or the way these giant bodies in the universe behave that don't make sense according to our current understanding of like Einstein's relativity. So they postulate there's some like dark matter, this unseen, unexplainable energy and like weight in the universe. And people are so this particle could, or if it's some particle or some wave, it can exist on all these different energy scales. And you have people that are dedicating their entire careers to just like working on one thing. Like, what if it's nanometer scale? What if it's angstrom scale? What if it's like giga electron volt scale? You have different experiments to test it in different regimes. And it's probably only like one of them, right? Like, so most of these people, they're going to spend their whole careers and a lot of their lives out of their graduate students to do this work that maybe probably will never see anything. And that's really awesome, I think. And I don't think you can do that by some. I don't think you can decide to devote your life to that by some like rational kind of calculation. It's really like a love for it. It's a passion. It's like a desire to see whatever it is out there. Um, So that's like one example, I guess, of like spirituality is like it's what gets you out of bed in the morning, even if you're tired, right? Which I don't think science has a good way to do that yet.
Well, it's interesting. So you had kind of related this in our conversation the other day to like building cathedrals.
Yeah, yeah. Right. It's like working towards something that's outside of you, right? It's like maybe what I do today, what I do here in my career isn't, I don't see the benefits of it, but maybe someone down the line, picks it up and gets somewhere cool.
Yeah, I love the way you put it earlier of the like if someone's building a cathedral, in the European cathedrals, it's like they were started laying down the bricks that maybe their great grandchild would experience the fully built cathedral on their deathbed, but
Right.
all towards the service of something outside of themselves, something greater than just me and my personal pursuits.
Mhm.
It's like in a modern age, how much we're seeing that replicated in science.
Mhm. Right. And if science is like something somehow coming out of a rational system of, you know, operating or navigating the world, it's like actually why would you ever do that? It's like maybe to some extent it makes sense to just, I know how wheat grows, right? And I know I can grind it into flour. So maybe I should just stop here. I should, be content with my wheat fields and my
We can feed
flour.
ourselves.
Yeah, like, we're good, right? We got fences to keep the prey or the predators out. I got, my chicken coop. Like, we're good, right? Um, so it's like to ever have something like a Nobel Committee giving prizes away, right? Um, it's like how do you get from A to B?
Why are
Um,
we discovering? Why are we pushing to expand further?
right. I wonder if some people, my contemporaries, would say something like, "Well, that's like just a inane desire in humanity to like understand the world around it." Um, But it like where do you draw the line there between spirituality and like I mean it seems like a spirit to me, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like why is
right.
there this innate piece of humanity to explore, to understand?
Hmm.
What about this world do we what about us and what about the world makes it such that we want to know more about it?
Hmm. Yeah.
We will dedicate our lives
Hmm.
to follow one path that might not even be the right path.
Hmm. Right. Like yeah, it's like you could definitely write a sort of mystical story about the scientific community being collectively possessed by this curiosity demon. Maybe it's not a demon, maybe it's like an angel, right? Or just some spirit that's maybe neither good nor bad, but it's like, whoa, that's very interesting. Um, Trying to think if there's any other sort of spirits that linger in scientific thinking.
Interesting that it starts to tap into this idea of like collective consciousness.
Okay. go on.
Well, you're saying like, what's this? Is there some spirit that a through line between like a scientific community or just the scientific um, tools?
Hmm.
Right? We had talked a little bit about it earlier before this call about how science, at least how I would define it, is a tool or a set of tools. It's about like methods of discovery. Like
Hmm.
the what you open in a science textbook is not science, it's discoveries created through a scientific method, a shared understanding of how we discover.
Hmm.
So if this community that follows these tools have this shared linking, right? You say like, oh, an angel or some spirits that connects us through wanting to discover and wanting to know more. That starts to become a collective consciousness.
Hmm. Right. Okay. And
There's a like a viewpoint of
hmm.
like the scientific community that is a
Hmm.
I guess it really brings up the question of like what would you even define as a consciousness, I guess, before you
Sure.
start talking about collective
Right.
consciousness.
Because I mean, I guess you have the like where my brain goes there is you have like the where is this collectiveness stored? Is it on the archive, right? Like is it this repository of papers that sits on the internet or whatever library? Is that like because that's sort of if you want to like tell someone a young scientist how to give them the tools to become a scientist, you tell them go read the papers, right? Go back into the archive and read up. Um, And you also have to have like some interpersonal kind of connection there, right? Like whatever advisors or professors you'll have that sort of show you the way, give you the path. Tools that have been um, hard, like fought for and earned, I guess. Um, it's like it's interesting though that you're like your idea of like or this idea of like separating the like the work itself from the tools, right? Because it's almost like the if a paper is well enough written, I'd say the tools are like well explained in the like presentation of the findings, right? In the method section of your paper, say. It's like double blind. And that's, I guess, what the reason that like any competent graduate program has some blending of like, on the ground research and like good classes, right? To give you those tools to go out and investigate reality. Um, collective consciousness is an interesting, yeah, I guess what is a consciousness, right? Uh,
You can talk about information. Like there's the information theory of individuality, which is a very interesting paper. I have not fully read through it, but I've read pieces from time to time because it's pretty dense and it's really this theory around how we would define an individual. Um, and it looks more towards a conscious stream of information as opposed to something bound in by like a physical body or by a shared immune system. Um,
hmm,
it's essentially is a way of how might we recognize individuals outside of our own biosphere, right? We have one Earth that we've seen life, come in pretty much one way, one packet.
right.
But there's individuals likely that exist outside of our own biosphere. So we need to have a more broad definition. Like the definition of life is pretty like piecewise put together. There's like nine things. Like if you hit X, Y, if you move, if you reproduce, if you yada yada
Hmm,
yada, you're self-sustaining,
right.
you are life. But that's sort of just like a definition that we cobbled together based on what we've seen. So this
Hmm,
information theory of individuality attempts to have a broader, more universal definition, looking at an individual as a continuous stream of information,
hmm,
where you have the idea of like you're born and you have your mind has this essentially you take in information, you process it, you adopt some, you continue on with it until you die. Um,
hmm, yeah.
and to me, if that's like a consciousness, but I guess there's the idea of like what would happen if you died. Like every time you go to sleep, all of your memories get ported over into another version of yourself. And
Hmm.
that new version wakes up.
Hmm.
It's like, is that still you? Was that a continuous stream of consciousness?
Right.
Like if I took all my memories and put it in a robot, for example, is that still me, or is that a me that's been copied over that thinks it's still me?
Right. It's interesting. So, okay, information theory, like, so does that give some definition of like consciousness? Like, consciousness is something that processes info that like can store information, or consciousness is something that can like dynamically process information in its environment. Um, 'Cause yeah. Hmm. So then you have like then you can I don't know, depending on how you play with your definition of like information, then like a solar system is a conscious entity, right? It's somehow this collection of astronomical bodies that have all sort of conquered their local, domains in their orbits, and they all move the same way around some star in the middle. So which physically it's how you say information, right? When I think information, I think some series of yes or no questions. It's like there's a very forget I want to say this guy's name's Landau, but it's something that starts with an L. Is like information is physical. Like there's a thermodynamic like quantity when every time you like load information onto some CPU or something. Like there's some basic amount of energy you require to do that. Where information could be like the position of bodies in some star system, right? Um,
Absolutely. And it's very interesting if you were to like go in and I would highly recommend taking a look at this paper is
hmm,
yes, in that sense, they would define that as an individual,
hmm,
where they have sort of three different categories of individuals. One whose information is very much stored mostly within itself, something like me or you. They'd have a more like a like broader collective type of individual, like a bee colony, for example, where there's this complex relationship of internal information and external information where they share like with pheromones with each other and they kind of operate
hmm,
as one unit with
right,
multiple different individuals within them. So there's like nested individuality,
hmm,
like a family structure might be another
right,
nested individual. And then things like, yeah, weather systems, solar systems, that it's mostly like what we call external information.
hmm,
Um, so yeah, no, it brings up questions like if you're saying that there's a consciousness to a solar system, for example,
hmm,
then it starts. It's funny. I'm glad you mentioned that because then it gets me to start thinking of like from a spiritual realm. A lot of spiritual traditions might say that there's a certain consciousness to like planet or a solar system. Like there's like a consciousness to Mars, and Mars has a certain energy, and Venus has a certain energy.
hmm. That's kind of cool because then you almost have this idea of like or a scientist is like trying to reduce these like conscious entities down to like easily identifiable physical processes, right? You got nuclear fusion going on in the star. You got, well, the gravity and all the planets are bound together. Or sorry, the sun and all the planets are bounded together by gravity, right? And then like, but whatever gravity is, it's like some curvature of space-time or whatever. But that doesn't make sense quantum mechanically. So jury's still out on that one. But you can simplify or you know the how you distill like a physicist would say that all of these like consciousnesses are just different manifestations of like the standard model of particle physics or some generalization of that, right? Your four forces and 16 something particles. It's a lot of particles. You get what I mean. Um, that's very interesting. I mean, then it kind of gives you this idea that consciousness is nothing but physical processes. Maybe.
Maybe. Well, it's interesting then, right? It's is it just physical, or like you were talking about with like the dark matter of, you know, as far as we know right now, there are things that make up what we see in the physical universe that we have yet to explain. And I mean, that's always the case with scientific pursuit as well. There's always pieces that we haven't been able to explain yet. And then there's questions of like, is that a physical reality? Are there things that can always be explained through just looking at our physical reality, or are there things beyond that?
Hmm.
And then it's like it brings up more and more questions of like, well, what does it mean to be a physical reality versus some other reality? Like, I don't even, is physical reality only things which can be described by physics? I'm not sure.
I mean, that's maybe a good definition. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, it starts to bring like all sorts of like weird mind-bending questions that start to like push up against
Hmm.
what's like conventionally easy to even try to understand.
You sure? Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of this like metaphysics we're doing here, right? Trying to understand the systems about how we reason about physical systems. That's a real doozy. You know what was I? It's like no wonder we're bad at teaching physics. It's like, wonder that it's one of the hardest classes most university students will take. It's like it's a lot. You gotta the different angles and interpretations one might have toward a physical system. Even if they read the word problem on two different days, right? Um, there's so much like in how you like intuit a problem to get some kind of understanding that doesn't really it's really hard to teach. Um,
And it's, I think one thing I mean, there's lots that we can sort of dig into here, but I think we should wrap it up soon.
okay,
One
yeah.
thing I want to sort of leave with is this idea that like what we've been discussing right now, like we've sort of gotten this question of like what is consciousness? And what's interesting is we as conscious beings, through our consciousness, are trying to understand what is consciousness.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it sort of becomes this like self-referential thing of like, and I sort of talk to you and I guess leave you and the audience with this as well of like, when we define spirituality. In this way, it's sort of a path of know thyself, how
Hmm.
I would define it. You know,
Hmm.
consciousness trying to understand what is consciousness? What is me? What
Right,
am
right.
I?
Sure. There's some theory in set I think it's set theory that says that it's impossible for any symbolic logic structure to describe itself. Yet here we are, to symbolic logic structures our minds trying to reason through that.
Ah,
Sorry to steal your last word.
no, no, it's great. Well, Robbie, thank you so much for being here for this. I'd love to continue this conversation in the future.
Yeah, me too.
Um,
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely, yeah. This has been Science to Sorcery, and thank you for watching, and hope to explore some more.